Alright, hello, welcome back. This is video 2 of our series working through our green activity packet on GDP. This next problem we're going to work through calculating GDP using the expenditures approach. I hope before you actually are sitting down to watch this video that you've read through all the materials, you've read the online notes, you've watched Professor McGlassen's videos, and you've also at first tried this problem, tried to do it yourself first, and after you've done all that, now you're watching the video, double checking your answer. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is review the expenditures approach. Remember what that means is we're taking total spending on all of those final goods and services that were produced within the domestic economy, add those spending pieces together, and that gives us GDP. Alright, so the first thing to remember is there are 4 pieces, the expenditure approach. Those 4 pieces represent our 4 decision makers: households, firms, the government, and then the rest of the world. Alright, so let's start with the first, households. Domestic households, spending by those households on goods and services, we call that consumer spending, or C. Oops, C for short. Not copyright C, but C, capital C. That's consumer spending. Again, that represents consumer spending on goods and services produced within the domestic economy. So, when you buy coffee before coming to econ class, the clothing you buy, the cable bill that you pay, right? You're paying for a service. So any spending that you do on goods and services, that is captured in consumer spending for the GDP approach, expenditure approach. All right, and in the U.S., consumer spending is very, very important. Makes up about 70% of U.S. GDP. Every country is different, not the same percentage, but U.S. consumer spending is huge. All right, our second piece, spending by firms. Primarily, we have what's called gross private domestic investment, or just investment for short. And we'll abbreviate that, capital I for investment. So one thing to remember, this investment is, we are not talking about what you might think of when you hear the word investment. We're not talking about Homer Simpson buying stock in the nuclear power plant. No, that is savings, people buying stocks and bonds. That is not what we mean when we say investment in this class. So what do we mean when we talk about investment in economics, calculating GDP? All right, there's really 3 pieces to investment spending. The first piece is spending by firms on new machinery and equipment, capital goods. All right, so let me type that in there. Spending by firms on new capital goods. In other words, spending on new machinery and equipment, building factories. All right, the second piece of investment spending is spending by households on new residential construction. What does that mean? That is basically housing, the housing market. So spending by households on new residential construction, i.e. housing. All right. So the other thing to keep in mind, notice we're saying new residential construction, new capital goods. If a firm buys a used piece of equipment, or you buy a house from 1890, that is not counted in the current year GDP, again, because it was counted when it was actually produced a long, long time ago. So we don't want to double count things. Again, we're only counting actual production that took place in the current period, so only production of those new items. The last piece of investment is net additions to inventory. And this is where we account for the timing change between when something's produced and when something's actually sold. For example, a car. If you buy a car in 2017, so you bought it in 2017, but it's a 2016 model, it's going to be captured in 2016's GDP because, again, that's when it was produced. Now, in 2016, even though no one buys it, what happens? It's going to get captured because it goes into inventory. Something's produced, but no one bought it yet. Inventory would go up. And then in 2017, when someone actually buys that car that was made last year, inventories are going to go down, okay? And that would negate the spending that took place in 2017. So that's how we account for any timing differences, is that inventory piece. So there's our investment spending, those three pieces. Again, remember, we are not talking about buying stocks and bonds. All right, the next piece is spending by government on goods and services. Government spending, G. All right. Again, remember, this is government spending on public goods. Government spending on things like the education, the military, the environment, science and technology, agriculture. Okay, government spending on public goods. What government spending, when we talk about GDP, we're not including government spending on transfer payments, things like Social Security, Medicare, unemployment benefits, income security programs, food stamps. Obviously, those things make up a huge portion of the budget, but they don't represent production. It's just transferring money from one group to another. So those transfer payments are not counted for GDP. Government spending, G, we're just counting spending on public goods and services by the government. All right, and then the last piece is spending by the rest of the world. We've got net exports, which I like to write exports X minus imports. I kind of like to write it out so we know we're talking about exports minus imports whenever we say net exports. So why plus exports minus imports? Well, again, think of what those things mean. Exports, these are goods produced within the domestic economy that are sold to other countries. We want to make sure that was produced in the domestic economy. That should be counted in GDP. Imports, these are goods produced in other countries that we buy here. We do not want to include that in our GDP, again, because those things were not produced here. They were produced in another country. So there we have it. There's our four pieces. So to get GDP, using the expenditures approach, add those pieces together. GDP equals C plus I plus G plus exports minus imports, net exports. Okay? And that last piece, again, can be negative. It can be positive, it can be negative, it could be zero, depending on whether exports are bigger than imports or vice versa. All right, so there we've got our formula. We're ready to do the problem. Okay, we're just going to take that, copy that down here. Whoops. All right. Let's copy that down there. And now we're going to plug in the numbers. So you'll notice in this table here, Sal Salute 2014, billions of current year dollars. Here's a bunch of stuff. Now, I gave you a little hint that not everything in the table may be used. Okay? Are we just going to take all these numbers, add them together? No. You got to remember what the expenditure approach is, because that's what you're asked for right here. Use the expenditures approach. Okay, so that's what we just did up here. GDP is just C plus I plus G plus net exports. So we're going to highlight the four pieces and then add those together. So let's find them. Consumer spending, that's right here. Highlight that. Investment spending, the 312. Government spending, the 235. Exports, and we're going to subtract imports. Okay, so those are the things we're going to use. The rest of this stuff, business taxes, income receipts from the rest of the world, blah, 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 wages, those are things that actually, if we were talking about the income approach, we would be concerned about. But the expenditure approach, we don't use those. So we're not going to worry about them. Just the things that we've highlighted here, right? Those are the only pieces. All right, so let's go ahead, add those in. So consumer spending, that is the 560. Investment spending, 312. Government spending, 235. And exports, 99 minus imports, 113. All right, so we add that all together and we get, and this is really important, don't just put 1093. 1093 what? Well, dollars, right? This is in dollars. And just $1,093? No, don't forget, this is in billions. So don't forget to write billions down there. So 1,093 billion, or essentially $1.093 trillion. There's our answer. All right, I hope you've enjoyed this video and learned a little bit more about the expenditure approach and given some data. How can you calculate GDP? There we have it. Again, please let me know if you have any questions. The next video we'll have up here will be real versus nominal GDP. And I promise it won't be quite as long, hopefully. All right. Thanks a lot. We'll see you later.